This tutorial is sponsored by the 3D Coloring Book, a project specifically designed to help empower artists who are struggling with texturing in Substance Painter and to help show you that anyone can create beautiful pieces of art with just a little bit of practice and guidance. To instantly gain access to hundreds of pre-made professional level models and hours of high quality tutorials, click the link in the description and begin your journey today.
Hey everybody, I'm Sadbert Inc., and I've got a lot to talk about today, mainly about this pedestal I created. I modeled, painted, and lit it entirely in Blender, with the unwraps done in Maya as a matter of personal preference. I'm quite happy with the way it turned out, and I'm going to share some of the insights that I had on the creative process of making it. So this video is a little different from most. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on how exactly I modeled it, the nitty-gritty stuff. I don't think it's particularly useful because I didn't really use any sophisticated modeling techniques to make it. This exercise was more about creating a heavily stylized and cute-looking diorama just to show off to look nice. So why stylized? A bit about my background. I was mainly an illustrator. I'd never touched 3D in my life until I decided to enroll in a 3D animation program here in Toronto. I've actually just finished my second year. My art style has always been kind of semi-realistic, or at the very least, very gritty and grungy. I kind of like really getting into line work, getting it scratchy, getting it kind of, grimy. I was never one to draw things looking, cute, soft, rounded. It was never my style. When I started modeling in my first year, like my peers, I sort of went the photorealistic route. Um, it's a trap that a lot of beginners fall into out of sheer necessity. You're already bogged down by learning the basics of the software, as well as the various theories of 3D modeling, various techniques, good habits like clean topology, learning how PBR and photorealistic materials and shaders work. It's a lot to digest. This is some of my first year work, and you can see that I pretty much tried to aim for photorealism as much as I could. I did all my texturing work, well, except for my very first project, this one right here. All my projects I did it the conventional way of modeling it in Max. Back then I used Max because it was the first program. It was the first 3D program that my school taught me. So we'd model in Max, take it into Substance Painter, and texture it there, bring it back into Max again, create our shaders, and then render it with Arnold. And yeah, photorealism is the first way everyone is usually taught to um, to do their 3D work because it instills a lot of good habits, and it teaches you how shaders work, right? Because whether you're doing NPR shaders or you're doing photorealism, shaders are always going to be a thing. You're always going to need to learn. You're always going to need to understand what a roughness map is, what a bump map is, what a normal map is, and that's also one of the many reasons why beginners start out with photorealism. But as a result of being pigeonholed into doing photorealism, a lot of beginner projects are more about getting something that looks good finished on time, cutting corners and making artistic compromises along the way rather than, really exploring the creative avenues within the 3D medium. And, we all know just how limitless how limitless it is to be a 3D artist when you really know your stuff. I'll go into more reasons why I think stylized modeling is important as an exercise for a beginner, but the most important one I think it is getting out of your comfort zone. And this scooter diorama that I created, you can see that it's completely unlike anything that I've ever really done before. It's cute, it's soft, it's rounded, and most importantly, it's not photorealistic at all. The first bit of inspiration for this project came from the opening shots of My Neighbor Totoro, the Studio Ghibli film. There's a lot of vibrant colors, soft shapes, beautiful lighting. They're all characteristic of Miyazaki's style. It was a good jumping off point for me. Although the film itself, well, Miyazaki's films do tend to have stylized looking characters, but more realistic looking environments. They still tend to heighten things. Like you wouldn't really see uh, a small lorry moving people's possessions. You wouldn't see it packed to the brim like this. It's comically exaggerated, and that sort of whimsy that you get is something that I wanted to capture a little bit in my own project.
All right, now for the fun stuff. So here are my references that I used to create this model here. Um, Vespas have been around since the 1940s, so there's all kinds of models, all kinds of varieties from the simplest kind to some really decked out, beautiful looking, mostly aftermarket customized Vespas with all this additional trim and things like basket carriers and front harnesses and things like that. Um, of course, even when you're doing something stylized and you're not necessarily creating concept art for it beforehand, um, it's still important to use a lot of references. And if anything, using realistic references to create something stylized forces you to think in terms of form rather than all the little extraneous details that make up a Vespa. The question you have to ask yourself is, how much can I take away from this object before it becomes completely unrecognizable? And what I mean by that is the use of silhouettes in design. Silhouettes in design are especially important when you're trying to create stylized characters. I know this Vespa isn't really a character, but I still incorporated that principle of using silhouettes. You can see here Team Fortress 2 characters, the lineup. One of the big things Valve did with their character design, because Team Fortress was a game that had been in development since 1999 and had originally a more realistic art style similar to Counter-Strike. But when they redesigned the game, one of the aspects of art direction that they incorporated was the use of silhouettes and design. You can see the characters here in their full form, but when we take all those details away and have just their silhouettes, we can still recognize that this is the demo man, this is the engineer, the heavy, the doctor, pyro, spy, sniper, soldier, scout. And Overwatch sort of took on that principle and heightened it even further. I'm not a big Overwatch player, so I couldn't really name every single character by heart, but you can see here that if you're a fan of the game, all these silhouettes are still completely recognizable to you. Stylized design benefits greatly from this because your main objective is to boil down things to their most prominent shapes, forms. The model of the scooter itself is quite simple. The other half, of course, of stylizing something is giving it appeal. And I did that, of course, by making this object incredibly soft and round. Vespas are already quite naturally curvy, but I decided to take it in even a step further by really adding all kinds of curves and rounds and leaving no, straight lines or hard angles. I mean, you can't really see it in the turntable, but even the exhaust here, I gave it a little bit of a bend, just to make it feel more organic. Although almost as if this was modeled with clay. I intermixed hard surface modeling. I made the scooter and most of its details here with hard surface modeling, but I also intermixed some sculpting, uh, especially with especially with this helmet here. The outside was made with a quad sphere, but the inside here, just like a helmet in real life has all this foam padding inside, I simply switched to sculpting mode and added all kinds of little soft details. Don't be afraid to switch between hard surface modeling and sculpting when an object has both, mechanical or manufactured hard surface details in combination with more organic stuff like this. The beauty of Blender is that it has a fairly robust set of sculpting tools. Obviously, it's no match for ZBrush, but for a project like this, having sculpting tools, all these sculpting tools right here, it really did come in handy, especially when I was modeling the ground here. All these little, peaks and valleys and little bumps and details in the ground, I did it all with sculpting. The foliage on the ground itself was created using Blender's hair system. Now, the hair system itself is a video entirely in and of itself. It's just far too much content for one video. But again, there's tons and tons of amazing tutorials on Blender's various particle systems, of which I used a few in this video. For example, the grass here is simply one image plane with a single texture painted on it. You can see it right here. And using this plane as the hair object, I simply defined various areas on this here. I defined areas of this pedestal mesh using the vertex paint system to add more or less grass, thicker grass here, thinner grass, sparser grass here. And I did the same for the mushrooms and the flowers. You can see here as well that I used the particle system along with a single mushroom model. The particle system of Blender allows you to, I'll show you right here. The particle system allows you to do all kinds of things, add all kinds of variations, sizes, rotations. It's unlimited, you don't have to manually place all these little things one by one by hand. Of course, you can go in and, modify things yourself if you want to do a bit more tighter art direction. If you feel like, hey, this blade of grass here, I don't want this, but this specific blade of grass has got to go. But to get yourself started out and then edit away from there, using Blender's hair particle system for stuff like foliage, it will save you a ton of time. Now that I had my scene modeled and assembled, two things that I decided to do to make it feel a little less static was, of course, have these lightning bugs fly around. The way I lit the scene was to have a bit of the dusk, the tranquil dusk, and the cool night sort of be half and half here. So for the night side, I used Blender's particle system again to add these little lightning bugs. And the way to do that is, again, it's a tutorial in and of itself, but it usually involves using volume objects to create these emitters that um, have an assigned mesh object. And in this case, I used this series. Well, actually, I just used one sphere with an emissive material on it, and had that, appear with a short decay and appear and disappear. And there's all kinds of settings that you can play around with. And you can see here this object here that I've selected. It's hard to see, but that's because I've had it display as a wireframe object. You can essentially select mesh objects and have them emit, and the number of times to emit, what frame it starts, the way it sort of flies through the air, the weight of it. It's all a variable that you can tweak around with. You can change the speed of it. You can see that I've done some changes and on the fly too because of Blender's EV rendering system. It's very easy to just sort of tinker around with things until you feel fit. Another thing that I did to make this feel less static was, of course, have an animated camera. a camera that turned around the scene. And to do that, all I did was use the Blender turnaround camera add-on, which you can find. I believe it comes default with Blender. If you search in your add-ons, the thing with Blender is that it comes factory default with a lot of add-ons that are not enabled by default. Uh, Mostly because a lot of Blender's add-ons tend to take up a lot of room here. So aside from the essentials, a lot of them are disabled, and there are quite a few. Um, there are actually quite a few add-ons that I guess I'll talk about them real quick. Um, there's add-ons like loop tools, which are really useful for modeling, but the add-on that I use for the camera is called the turnaround camera. So if you just search turn, if you enable this add-on, it allows you to have the default camera, which is, when you start a scene, there's already a default camera. It has that camera. It has that camera essentially um, orbit around a selected object, and all it takes is 2 clicks, really. You select your camera here. You select the object that you wish to have turn around. In this case, it's grass. It's the grass field object, and play around with some variables here, what direction it rotates, the speed of the rotation, how many frames it lasts over, things like that, and you'll have yourself a perfectly nice turnaround that loops. Actually, it loops perfectly too. The only real cheat that I did for this entire project, as far as not hand painting things, was this wicker basket material. I'm sure you noticed it earlier. Well, also this checker, but that was just something I generated directly in Blender shading system. But this wicker basket material was something that I didn't create. It was something that I found using Blender Kit. It's a fairly sophisticated wicker generation system that lets you pick colors for the various kinds of wicker, the spacing, the scale, all kinds of things. It's highly customizable. And what is Blender Kit, you may ask? If you are new to Blender and want to be a concept artist, especially, Blender Kit is an absolute godsend. Blender Kit is more or less a giant library of, materials. Well, yeah, we've got materials here. There's models too, pre-made characters. Uh, there's furniture, all kinds of things. Almost anything that you may need is here. Some of it's paid, some of it's free. But if you're someone who wants to work on a hero object and put it in a scene, but you don't really want to work on the scene itself. Let's say, I don't know, you have a gun. You're modeling a gun or you're modeling a car, and you want to put it in an environment, but you don't want to spend your entire day working on other things too. This is something that you want to get done quickly. Um, because you want to focus on your hero object. Blender Kit is the perfect add-on for that. And it also comes bundled with Blender. It's just not enabled. So if you search Blender Kit, if you go to your preferences and go to your add-on section and you type in Blender Kit, it's right there. And you can just switch between find models and find materials to find whatever it is you need for your project. And I found this really handy wicker material. It's called Weave. Right here. And it looks fairly warped and kind of weird and absolutely nothing like what I've got here. But like I said, it's highly customizable, and with a few tweaks, I got it looking just the way I liked it, which was this. If I asked you why this doesn't look as good as this, you'd probably answer with lighting, and you'd be right. Lighting is the final stage, and it's probably one of the most fun stages of having a final end product. Blender comes packaged with Eevee, which is a raster-based real-time 3D rendering engine, and it is just an absolute godsend. If you have a decent PC, you can get some really amazing results and have it all in real time too. My computer is no beast. It's about 5 years old, And I can see something that looks very close to the final product that you saw at the start of this video. So what really is lighting? Well, most of you who are familiar with the concepts of lighting know the 3-point lighting setup, the most, traditional lighting setup. You have your back, your key, and your fill. I kind of opted out of doing that because, well, I just wanted to have a bit more fun with my lighting. I wanted to make it feel a bit more natural, as if it's being lit by real sunlight and some moonlight in the distance. So I chose not to use the 3-point lighting setup, but there's tons of ways to do it. Um, Another thing that really enhances your lighting is using atmosphere. And what is atmosphere? It's a material that you can put in a volume object, like a sphere or a cube, very similar to those fireflies that I showed you earlier. This volume object contains an atmosphere, which is essentially just, some fog, very, very light fog. If you go to your shader, you can actually create, oops, you can actually create a volume object with a shader for atmosphere right here. And there's dozens of tutorials on how to achieve this effect quite nicely. So you have your atmosphere, you have your lighting already, but there's a few more things that you can do. One thing I enjoy doing is sometimes adding blockers, sort of in the vein of real film lighting. The way the way grips and gaffers do it on set is they usually have things called, flags and blockers that go directly in the path of the light in order to create shapes for it. It could be something as simple as adding branches. If you look right down here, this is actually a plane that I put a bunch of noise modifiers on. You can't see it because I have it disabled viewing in the viewport, but it does catch the light from this moonlight here. And if I move this around, you can see that some of the texture is taken away. It looks a bit too clean, doesn't it? But if you put that back, there's a bit of texture, almost as if the moonlight is peeking through some branches. Think about little elements like that. Shape your lighting. Don't just plop a bunch of lights in the scene. You have to think about what off screen is affecting the flow of the light. If you're still not sure what to do about lighting, because lighting is pretty much half the art, you can have the most beautifully textured and rendered object, but it's going to look like crap if you don't light it well. And if you're not sure about what to do, and you don't really want to experiment too much because you feel like it's a bit directionless, you need some fundamentals, you feel. My favorite video on lighting, it's a really great primer for people who have absolutely no idea how, a movie is lit or what professional lighting ought to look like. My favorite video is what happens when a movie has no gaffer. It's from Vanity Fair magazine, from their Reverse Film School series. And I'm not going to play the entire video for obvious copyright reasons, but it's a really good video. It's only 10 minutes long, but it teaches you quite a lot about what lighting ought to be, how to shape lighting, how to control it, you know, the different kinds of light temperatures that can convey different kinds of moods. It's a really good video, and if you're new to lighting, I highly recommend you watch it. I hope you found everything that I've talked about in this video to be helpful. I wanted to focus less on the technical aspects of creating this diorama, but rather I wanted to focus more on ways to think about challenging yourself as an artist, the importance of playing around with style, especially ones that are alien to you, stepping out of your comfort zone and setting up and lighting scenes to achieve a look that you want. A project like this, it's a fairly small project, but even something like this can seem kind of overwhelming, especially if you're pretty new to 3D. You start out and you're not quite sure what what the sort of direction of your project looks like because you're kind of making it up as you go, being new and all. As a beginner, one of the most frustrating things you experience is simply not knowing how to achieve your vision and what your vision ought to be because you're so self-aware of your own limitations that you try to modify your designs to be more in line with what you think you can model. I'm here to tell you that with time, not only will you overcome these technical hurdles, but that eventually you will want to start thinking about style without compromise to be a better artist. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did and you want to see more of my work, the links to my socials are in the description below. Have a good day.